let's move now to when life ends. Why do Jews not cremate the dead?
Um, it has to do with a certain respect and acknowledgement of the sacredness of the body. That if the body that we use throughout life is, let's phrase it a little differently. You don't own your body. Your body is owned in the Jewish in the halachic in the Jewish realm of law. We don't actually own our body. We're loaned our body. So if you decide, I want to chop off my left finger, I don't know, maybe you have some psychotic reason for doing that. If you want to do that, you don't have permission. Like you can't say it's my body, I can abuse it. That's not a Jewish understanding. The Jewish understanding is that God loaned us this form of life to be for X amount of years that we live on this planet. So since it's something that we don't own, we treat it with a certain sense of sacredness, that it's holy. So we allow it to be and to go into its natural state, which means that if we return the body to the earth, it eventually will become again the soil and you know resurface as something else, as another form of life. But because we come from dust, we have to be returned to dust.
That's why we don't believe in suicide. I read that years ago.
That's correct. That's the reason
Why
we don't believe
suicide is absolutely forbidden by Jewish
correct.
halachic law
Correct.
because
Correct.
it's not our bodies and we can't take
Correct.
it.
Correct.
People don't understand that. Oh, how come Jews don't?
Yeah.
They shouldn't because they don't, and the Muslims don't commit suicide. The Jews
Correct.
don't, religious Jews shouldn't, right?
Yeah. We don't. We're very strongly against suicide again because we don't own our body. It's not our body to abuse. That's why we have to take care of our body. Even to overeat is a prohibition of the Torah. It's a prohibition of Jewish law. We have to take care of our bodies. A person has to exercise and to keep themselves fit. And if they can,
So every time I take a vitamin, I'm doing it because I'm worshiping God.
exactly.
That's why I originally became a nutritionist, was to do
And,
it with God's
absolutely.
word.
Every
God's
time
word.
you're taking care of your body, you're doing God's work.
I remember writing an article for the Chabad Journal in 1977,
Yeah.
and it was published in Brooklyn. And it was, the title of the article was "Is Kosher Junk Food Yiddishkeit?" It was really a revelation at the time. People didn't understand that because I'd go to these events and the people are eating real dreck,
Yeah.
pastries and heavy food, and
Yeah.
and then it was suffering from hypertension and heart attacks. And there was a relationship
Yes.
because the ancient Jewish diet was the opposite of that. It was more of a Yemenite diet.
Yeah.
Very lean Yemenite diet. I remember writing a book in 1983 that Macmillan published called the Skeptical Nutritionist, and I said traditional Jewish food is not Polish holiday food.
That's
It's
correct.
it's not corned beef at a wedding every
Correct.
night of the week.
Correct.
It's more like hummus and
Correct.
vegetables.
Yeah. It's more what the Sephardic Jews eat. Yes.
Yeah, and I was praying that the Jewish people would enlighten themselves and eat better.
Oh, they are, by the way.
Has it changed a bit?
Yeah. Yes, in my lifetime, even it changed.
Thank God.
People are much more health conscious and much more aware of.
Rabbi, do you still have 5 minutes for me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I asked a young lady who works for the show, Karen, who you spoke with at the beginning, a lovely person. She's been with the show for years. She's a devout Christian. I said, could you write some questions for the rabbi from a Christian perspective? Because she's interested in your work. So she wrote this. She said, Yom Kippur is soon approaching, also known as the Day of Atonement. If the Jewish people do not offer blood sacrifices, she writes, how do they believe they can receive forgiveness from God? I don't even understand why the blood sacrifice is required, but that's her question.
The highest level of a blood sacrifice, if you want to use that metaphor, is the sacrifice of self. And one of the things that we do on Yom Kippur is that we don't eat, we fast. And fasting is a form of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
That we're saying we're dedicating our life to something that's higher than us, but it's also a type of refraining that throughout the year and everything negative that comes, all the sins that come to a person come because there's an overindulgence in something. It can be an overindulgence in desire for power, there's overindulgence in desire in relationships, overindulgence in food. And on Yom Kippur, we free ourselves from those things. We don't eat. We don't wear leather shoes, which represents mastery. We don't anoint ourselves, which represents beauty. We don't have intimacy, which represents relationships. We do all these things to refrain ourselves from these physical activities to show ourselves and show God that we're transcending the needs of the body, the immediate needs of the body, to live a higher existence.
So
Obviously,
that's the equivalent of the blood sacrifices
that is
by denying our lust, for
correct,
example,
correct,
or
correct,
to be a chaza and eat
correct.
fakakta food that day.
Exactly. That is our sacrifice.
What are your beliefs on evil and Satan? Do you believe what took place in the Garden of Eden was literal?
Literal in the sense that it happened, of course. Everything it says in the Torah is happened on a literal sense, but they represent the characters of the Torah. The are archetypes. They're not just individual people, which means that they, even though it was a person of Abraham, is a person of Isaac, the person of Adam and Eve, they also represent some archetypes. So Adam and Eve represents the archetype of humanity, and the snake represents the archetype of what it means to be evil, to be enticed to power, enticed to become like God, enticed to the world of fantasy, enticed to the world of lust. That's what that's what the snake represents. So it's a literal story that embodies a quality, a certain type of narrative, a meta narrative that's relevant to all humanity. And the story is basically, do we take responsibility for our lives? Because when they finally eat from the tree of knowledge, and Adam is asked why he does it, he says, "Oh well, my wife told me to eat it." And Hashem asks his wife, "Oh well, the snake told me," which means you're passing the buck. And the whole idea of this story of the snake is, if you do something wrong, own it, repent for it, transform yourself, and make yourself new from the beginning.
Don't pass the buck.
Don't pass the buck.
Finally, Karen writes this: how have the Jews sustained their culture, rituals, and beliefs despite such persecution and so much adversity? And she says, I personally believe Jews truly are God's chosen people, and he has sustained them. I believe Jews are proof of God's word. But she's asking, how have the Jews sustained their culture, rituals, and beliefs despite centuries of persecution?
So there was Queen Victoria once asked, I think it was the Royal Academy of Science, to delve into the possibility of, is there a possibility of miracles? And the answer, that the response that she got was, we searched all the different type of miracles and we did our research, and there is a miracle in creation. It's called the Jew. So I do think that Jews have a miraculous. One of the great Jewish writers, the Yavitz, writes in the 1600s that greater than the story of the going out of Egypt and the miracles that happened in the biblical narrative is the miracle of Jewish survival. So I think it's a divine guiding hand that allows Jews to transcend the unraveling natural progression of history.
Yet we see Jews like Weinstein or Madoff who discuss the whole world without sitting in like God himself and condemning them.
Yeah.
It makes me shiver when I see people like that, because they are the embodiment of anti-Semitism. If I may say, it's people like that who make people hate Jews.
You know, I hear what you're saying, but I want to say two things. First of all, I think Jews, we have to look at it as a collective, not as individuals, which means the collective unfolding of Jews is a miracle. Sometimes individual Jews can do nasty things, of course. But I think the very important point is blaming anti-Semitism on Jews is always a mistake, in my opinion, because anti-Semitism has nothing to do with Jews. Anti-Semitism has to do with a rotten mindset of an anti-Semite. And to say that anti-Semitism comes because of Jews, I think is just justifying an anti-Semite. I don't actually think that anti-Semitism is rooted in Jews. I think it's an excuse. Like if every single Jew would be the most upright, just person,
it still hate Jews.
They'll still hate Jews. It's just an excuse for an anti-Semite to say, "Oh, look at Harvey Weinstein. Oh, that's why I hate Jews." And general, all type of racism is when you define the collective by the individual.
So that's true for any race. In other words, let's say,
any
because of the quote black teens running rampage in New York, running wild with this, with that, beating people up, hitting old people. You can't say all African Americans are like them.
That's racist to do that. Correct.
All right. Well, that's
that individual person is acting like an animal. Fine. But the moment you say that the Jews are, no, it's a Jew that acted a certain way. And that's a very important distinction about anti-Semitism and all form of racism.
Well, going the other way, or the Jews who walk around hating the Goyim get me very upset.
Correct, the same thing.
I run into Orthodox Jews who sit and try to like bond with me sometimes. I won't say where. Once it was at the White House Hanukkah party, and the Orthodox rabbi, so-called, came up and started him with the goyim bashing. And my wife was with me, who was born Christian and converted to Judaism, got very offended. She said, "You know, my father fought in World War II, and if it wasn't for goyim like us, your ancestors would have been burned to death." It's horrible, but it exists.
I agree. Listen, there are small people on all sides, and one of the job of your sitting at this mic is to enlighten people to a better world, to a better possibility.
So on a better level, we're going to go now to, I think, a final question. Although with you, there's no final question because there's no final solution. Pardon me, bad joke. And you spoke, Rabbi, once, and I was fascinated by wind, fire, water, and earth. What were you getting at? Wind, fire, water, and earth. What is that?
Well, that's obviously, the four elements. There's an ancient idea of four elements, but what I was getting at is that what really holds us back from life, from being truly alive and present, is four things. Earth is depression. Wind is wind is like is mindlessness, like this not having concentration. Water is insatiability, and anger and fire is anger, or arrogance.
Mm.
That a person works on their arrogance and works on being satiable and works on being joyful and works on being present and mindful, you'll live a higher spiritual existence and a better existence physically, spiritually, mentally.